product's not just about yourself. It's not just about getting the metrics and like getting the next promotion. I sometimes feel people can be in these worlds. Product is really about a team. It's really about every single person on your team really feeling bought in as a co-collaborator with you.
Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast about the career stories that shape who we become. Wins, stumbles, tough calls. We get into all of it. If you're ready to grow, level up, or take a bold leap, you're in the right place. Quick ask, if you're getting value from the show, hit follow. It helps us grow and lets us know what's working. Today we speak with Michelle Parsons.
Hey, Michelle, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Excited to have this discussion with you today. Can you talk about what you were up to at Lex?
Yes, the past couple of years have been really quite a whirlwind. I joined Lex, which is a LGBTQ plus social app, after having advised the company, Kel Rakowski and Jen Lewis, for probably about half a year, when they were really in this pivotal moment of thinking through like where do they take this product. The product had really started off of an Instagram account, had really acquired a very loyal, robust community of LGBTQ plus people across the United States, specifically kind of in New York and LA. And they wanted to make an app. And so they made an app that was very much a dating product, really focused in on the sapphic, non-binary, and trans community. And they were just kind of wondering like what they were going to do next. And so I, at the time, was the chief product officer at Hinge and had a lot of opinions about the dating space, having had worked in it for 2 years there. And one of the things that was clear to us, or clear to me at the very least, was that attitudes and opinions were really changing towards dating apps and dating in general. I think coming kind of post-COVID, relationships built with more intention, people wanting to meet people outside of dating apps, and kind of the swipe fatigue, if you've heard of that. And what we noticed in the product as I started kind of digging into their numbers was that there is actually a lot of users who are trying to hack the product for other use cases, such as, hey, I'm looking for someone to go on a walk with. Hey, is anyone in my neighborhood have recommendations for gender-affirming healthcare? Hey, I actually need a new roommate. Anyone need a room in Bushwick? And so we started seeing all these early signals of community needs. And so we leaned into that. We did some more digging. We did some surveys with our users. And what we discovered is that people were also, while they were, yes, maybe interested in dating, they actually had no place where they could go and find community. And if you think about social apps that exist today, you have TikTok, you have Instagram, you have Snap, you have all these really big behemoths that have turned into like media companies almost. And so it's really easy to find a lot of content that might entertain you on your phone, but it's really difficult to find somebody in your neighborhood to go walk your dog with or grab a cup of coffee with. And so we saw this white space opportunity. I joined Kel and Jen as a co-founder of the app as we thought about pivoting this product. And so the past, 2 years plus has really been about this moment of pivoting our product from a dating kind of focus into this community focused, really inspired by our community and how they were kind of hacking and using the product. Since then, we've really grown our product to over 500,000 active users. We added a bunch of features around community building. So we have a groups feature where you can come and discover local groups near you. So if you're interested in a queer book club or a queer run club, you can find that on Lex, or if you don't find it on Lex, you can start it yourself. So very much an amalgamation of like what I like to call it is a Reddit meets a Twitter meets a meetup product.
Very cool. And that sounds like a very big change.
Yeah, it was. And, when you think of products that you're building, you always have an idea. Maybe it's a passion, maybe it's something that you see as a need personally, or you see as an opportunity in the space from talking to people. I think for us, honestly, it was a scary moment, right? Because I think when you have a product and you have a loyal user base, it's always a really difficult decision to say, hey, we need to pivot. We need to pivot because there is something that is needed either from our business perspective, our longevity perspective, or where we believe the users need to go. And so I've seen this kind of time and time again in my career, but I think this one, especially at such an early stage, is a really it was one that like I think was very inspiring for me to honestly see our my co-founders lean into that. We did get a lot of pushback from our users in the early days when we first pivoted. We went from a cyan blue into this green redesign, brand new app. And we had a lot of like pushback from our community, our early community members, people who were with us since like the Instagram days, saying, "Hey, I don't want this. We want the old Lex back." And we really had to talk to those users and let them help them understand like why we were making the decisions we're making. It's not that we were just like leaning into like what everybody else was doing, social media, dating app wise. It was really about creating a space of longevity and in a space position of power really for our company to fill a much needed white space in the market.
Sounds like a great use case and kind of going from a local maxima and finding the global piece with it. And I know that's a tough thing to do, and things are going well. And how do you step back and realize, okay, maybe there is a different way we should think about what we're doing?
And I think to that point, like things were going well. Like we were growing month over month. But I think when you really look at usage, two things became true. One is in the dating market space, you're constantly on this like hustle or this mission or this race to find new users as people who find success in the product kind of leave your product, right? And then secondly, as we looked into our users who were quote unquote hacking our product, right? They were leveraging the features that we had to do something that was like it was not designed for. So again, these posts about more community, friends, and events, or taking our one-on-one chats and converting them into group chats, for example. Um, we saw that those users who were doing those types of behaviors actually retained longer and they were more satisfied with the product. And so in our minds, like looking at that data, talking to our users, we saw an opportunity to really help more of our user base understand that they could also find these other things for kind of their benefit within our product. I always like to say that, dating apps can solve one problem for you, and that's kind of the discovering the match. Maybe you find your match, great. But for our product, I want that to be a product that can live with you regardless of your life stage. So maybe I want to find a partner. Fantastic, we can help with that. Maybe I am moving cities and I need a new friend group. Maybe I need a new roommate. Maybe I need advice on, having a conversation with my boss or having a conversation with a therapist about gender affirming care or whatever the case may be. And so we're able to build on all aspects of what a user might need through kind of the product features that we're developing, kind of that one pivot as well.
And was that a tough sell for you with other stakeholders to think about pivoting in that kind of way?
Yes, because it's always scary. And I think even if you talk about pivots within, a product feature or something of that nature, right? Changing your product. I think of the days of like Instagram, like chronological feed, like going from that into something much more algorithm driven or going to shopping and changing products fundamentally from what they used to be to what they are now. Um, can always be a scary thing. But I think if you look at those things when done based off of data and based off of user insights and based off of where the market is going and that vision that you have and kind of tying those three things back together, most of the times those things end up for the better. And I think for us specifically, the biggest fear was not about changing because we knew we needed to do something different because our growth was like we were growing, but it was not like the hyper growth that we wanted. And we knew the costs associated with the current marketplace that we were in. And so for us, it was really about convincing our users more so than anything that this was something that was going to be even better than the product they had already grown to know and to love. And that also we wouldn't kind of stray too far from our values and from our brand voice. I do think that that is something that you can sometimes lose in these types of scenarios. You stray too far away from your core audience. I think you kind of see this in Be Real, for example, right? They had a really unique way that they were positioned in kind of the social space, close friends. And when they try to broaden that out to like more influencers because they had to grow, they had to find ways to monetize, they kind of lost their steam. And so I do think that being true to your brand voice and your brand values are really, really critical in doing these types of big changes.
That is so interesting. I'm going to note that as something I want to follow up with you on. And it could just be a really interesting follow up.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you talk a little bit about your path and how you got into product work?
Yeah, so I always have to say like my path was very non-linear into product. I studied science in undergrad and really had this pathway that I was going to become a doctor. And so that everything I did kind of up until the moment that I decided not to do that was in pursuit of that particular goal. And I'm a very like goal oriented kind of aspirational person. So I was like to have something that I'm working towards. And describing that goal, or describing that like my senior year of college, which seems like a pretty wild thing to do, but I just wasn't confident that that's what I wanted to do full time. And so I joined Teach for America and I taught high school science because those that don't do teach. And I fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with teaching for a variety of reasons. It was something that gave me a lot of energy. And I draw a lot of similarities and parallels to product management, though I had no idea that product management was even a job during that time. You're thrusted into a classroom, of with a bunch of students who have different goals, different desires, different levels that they're at in terms of their comprehension and knowledge. You have to get them from point A all the way to point Z by a certain period and a certain time frame. And so a lot of it is like backwards planning. You have your goal, you break that down into smaller goals, and you then work backwards to get everyone kind of moving in that same direction while also running a classroom and managing it. And so I really find a lot of parallels into the work that I ultimately ended up doing, which is after Teach for America, I joined a small ed tech startup on the content team. And like some, young 20, 22, 20 something year old, I was very eager, full of energy. And I just kept on being like, I have an idea. I have an idea. Like, what about this? What about this? And my manager at the time was just like, go talk to the product team. Like they deal with a bunch of this stuff. And I'm like, what's the product team? And that was like really my first like entry point into like the world of product. And I think, as a small startup, you need all hands on deck. Um, and the chief product officer at the time there was like, okay, help us with this consumer insights project. We're the data scientists to pull a list of customers, and then we want to learn these things. So come up with some questions and do a report essentially. So that was my first foray into it. I worked with our data scientist, who actually became one of my very good friends. We're both in product leadership positions now. And I did some customer interviews. I consolidated all the insights, and I created a presentation of those insights and kind of some solutions and suggestions to the team. And I just loved it so much. That startup ended up folding because we were working on a subject or a domain that was acceleration and remediation for high school science and math students on their own personal free time. So not necessarily an easy sell to high school kids to do school outside of their required schooling. But it was a really, really fun place to learn like kind of the basics of products. And then after that, I really leaned heavily into it and got them the opportunity to join a consumer tech startup in Kayak as the third PM there. And that was really fun because it was really a different way of doing products from the education tech publishing world, where I had spent a couple of years, where you are very waterfall. If people even remember what that is, right? It's very much like semester cycles, and you're building things for sales teams, and it's a very different way of doing consumer tech products, where it's very much about insights and data and A/B testing and quick iterations. And I had to kind of learn that from scratch, but that even much further solidified my love for this space, because it's a good blend of like the science background that I had mixed with the creativity and the visioning that I also, was so close to kind of my own heart essentially, and things that brought me joy. So yeah, so spent some time at Kayak, then I went to work at Spotify on our personalization platform team. Really the pivot there was I wanted to learn about ML models and personalization systems. I had an inkling that was going to be really, really important. It turns out that was right. And I was, lucky enough to kind of get some firsthand exposure, kind of building these really big systems, data sets, and models that we've been deployed across Spotify to build, some of the really well-known things that you use on Spotify. So from your daily mixes to your, what is it called now? The DJ, to the blends, to your year in review, the underlying foundational data that is powering all of that are the things that my teams built, which is really fun. But yeah, but then I spent time at Netflix, and then I joined Hinge, and helped them through like their big scale up. And that was really fun. And I think my career has really been one of different types of experiences. But I think the thing they have all in common is it's really about working on products that have real impact to the way that users engage with the world around them. And that brings me a lot of joy because it's not just building products. It's really about human psychology at the end of the day. What brings people joy? What brings people pain? What brings people excitement? What satisfies true needs? And I think, the dating space that I've been, or dating and social space that I've been in the past, 4 or 5 years now, really is like the epitome of that because it's people as the products almost in some capacity. We are leveraging our phones and technology, but at the end of the day, it's about connection and human interaction. And I find that so fascinating because for so long, the models and systems have commoditized that human element of things. Like we are the market. We've created these systems, we created these dynamics in the products that we've built that reward dopamine, that reward constant engagement, but at the cost of true intentional interaction. And that's why I love about Lex so much is that we're really focused on this idea of the URL to the IRL is again on TikTok. And I says prior, like you can find anything and everything that you want to entertain yourself. But at the end of the day, you're still by yourself. And I might feel connected to millions of other people who culturally understand the relevance of this particular meme or who are in the comments or who I might identify with on these screens, but it's really hard for me to go find someone to go walk my dog with. And I experienced that firsthand when I was living up in the Upper West Side in New York. And I used Lex. I opened up Lex. I created a group that was called the Upper West Side Queers. Our first meetup, I'm not a community organizer. I'm just a normal person, and we had, 12 people that showed up, random people. We did another one, and then we had 30 people that showed up. And then from those like 2 minutes, I actually found like 4 friends that we like were like, oh, actually we're super similar and we have a lot in common and we're gonna make our own side group text and go and hang out, one-on-ones. But that groups, has since from like 30 people, I think now the group I just looked at it yesterday has like 400 people in it.
Wow.
And that's really incredible because that's 400 connections that you potentially have the opportunity to meet in real life because of your proximity to one another, which is awesome.
That is awesome. And there's also some really interesting problems to solve there, which always that's what makes product work exciting, I
Yeah.
think. And when you can have passion about what you're doing, and you clearly do. The one thing I will say is doing doing a pretty good number of these interviews now. I don't think I've talked to one person in the product space who actually started off thinking they were going to end up in product in any capacity. And I just always find that super interesting. I'm sure when you were a science teacher, being a chief product officer wasn't even in the roadmap, I would assume.
Yeah, I didn't even know that that was a job that somebody could have. And what a cool thing to have been able to discover that kind of. And I think, now when I look at, the things that I've been able to experience, the product that I've been able to kind of just put even a small little mark on, I take a step back and I'm like, wow, these are products that billions of people have used in aggregate. And I think that's really cool because I do think when I think about our responsibility as people who are building products, it is to build products with humans in mind, right? It is to build products that deliver true human value, that deliver moments of joy while also delivering business value. Like you can't compromise either of those things. And I do think that for me, like one of my own personal values and own personal missions is to not compromise human value for business value. And I think so many times you can get into those kind of those tricky scenarios where it's like, revenue at all costs. And I think you do oftentimes you see the impacts on those products over time. And a lot of those products don't exist anymore, or they're struggling to kind of stay afloat and stay alive.
Sure. And I think some of that actually might be a really good segue into what I wanted to ask you next. And I think some of the follow-on questions from there. What are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's been so many lessons. I think for me, one of the key things that I've learned is it's okay to ask for help and to not know. I think oftentimes, especially in the product space, like people are always coming to you for answers. They're always coming to you for solutions. They're always coming to you to like know what's going on. And I've seen so many people who I've managed, people who are friends and colleagues of mine feel so stressed out that they just like can't keep all these plates spinning, and I empathize and I relate. And for so long, I would mask. I would just say like, no, no, I got it. I got it all. You want me to add another thing to my plate? Sure, I got it all. And I remember a critical moment actually once, and I don't share this like super broadly, but I'll share it here. Is I was early in my career at Kayak. I was doing relatively well. I had been kind of promoted from like owning desktop hotels to owning all of hotels across mobile and desktop, from search all the way to checkout. And that was a pretty big thing. Um, and then our flights PM had left the company, and so they asked me to run flights too. And I was like, yeah, I got that. That's amazing. It's a huge career opportunity for me to own two of the biggest verticals in a in a meta search site. Absolutely, I'll take that. I had just had a new designer starting. Again, I was still pretty like mid-career at this point, juggling a lot, saying yes to everything. Our CTO would always like kind of ping me on the side, being like, I had this idea in this test. Be like, yes, I can do that. I started to get closer to the business team as well. And so I was actually invited to go on a kind of sales business conference out with them, a travel conference out in LA. And I went, and I had a new designer starting, and I kind of like really quickly jotted down a list, like on literally a paper, like a numbered list of things that I needed her to get done. And like, in retrospect, I'm like, wow, that was like not a collaborative way to do anything. I was not being a good partner, but she was basically on her first week so overwhelmed. And I think I wasn't even thinking about that at all. So I was so just like kind of worried about like myself and like all the things that I need to get done. And I didn't ask for help, and I went off to this trip, and she was struggling there. And my boss messages me. I get an email, and she's like, I'm just like wondering if you can even do this job. And I was like, just like really taken aback to get a message like that from your boss. You're just like, can you do this job? Like, are you able to do it? And I was like, wow. I was like, immediately hopped on the phone with her. And, I think that was a really big pivot moment for me, or just like realization moment that, product's not just about yourself. It's not just about getting the metrics and like getting the next promotion. I sometimes feel people can be in these worlds. Product is really about a team. It's really about every single person on your team really feeling bought in as a co-collaborator with you, as your cross-functional team having a really core seat at the table. And I think since then I've really like, and again, that was really early in my career. I've made it a priority of mine to say like, hey, I don't know this, but like you're an expert in this area, and I want to work with you to figure this out. Whether it's a design problem or a research problem or a data problem or an eng problem, it's really about ensuring that everybody has a voice at the table, and that my voice is really the voice that's taking all the information that I'm getting and creating a comprehensible understanding of that across the board, like that through line that I think is really critical. That's one. I think two is, it's also kind of the same thread. It's also super important, I think, to really understand what you're saying yes to when you're building. I think sometimes you can get caught in this habit of like getting feature requirements thrown down to us by the CEO or the founder or somebody who's in a higher position than us, or who's in sale, or even our customers being like, we need this thing. I must have it. And, stopping and asking the question, why? All right, let's really try to understand the problem behind the solution. Like, what are we trying to solve with this implementation, with this idea? Um, and I think that that's a really good lesson for everybody who's in this role, like even people who have been doing it for a long time. Because sometimes we're like, oh yeah, we've seen this, we've done that, let's just go and get it done. But there's always an opportunity, I think, for us to slow down and ask why. Okay, what data is driving this? What do we have? What more do we need to understand and uncover to really unpack the problem so that we understand the full scope of potential solutions or potential ways to test and get more information?
Couldn't agree more about asking why and making sure you're working on the right things or solving the right problems. And you said something early on that kind of hits me, because I think this is something I tend to do, and I think a lot of other people do, but it's that saying yes
Mm-hmm.
to everything, which ultimately turns out it typically turns in, it seems like it's a great idea in the moment. and you're being helpful and you're working on things that you're interested in, but it also kind of puts you in this place of I'm taking on way too much and it's starting to impact everything that I'm doing in one way or another. And kind of curious, how did you get yourself out of that mindset of saying yes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, a mentor of mine once told me when I was kind of in the midst of this, like I can start to feel it now. So I think there's a couple of things. One is identifying when you're reaching that point of like, ooh, I'm taking on too much. 'Cause, like sometimes I don't notice I'm saying yes. I'm just like, oh yeah, I can do that for sure. But I'm not realizing what else is on my list. Um, so starting to do a really, a good job of like sensing, okay, like when is like the pot almost boiling over a little bit. So before I get to that point, like understanding like, okay, let's see what's like actually what actually is important. What can I delegate? What do we say no to? What do we say not now to? Right. So I think those are really important in finding ways, especially this is especially difficult, I think, when you're talking to people who are like superior to you, right? In terms of just like, hey, these are your bosses or your boss's bosses. Saying no to those types of requests are oftentimes the hardest. And so it's for me, it's oftentimes having like really good rationale for why and why not. um, and having that mental model available for people to really understand the way that you think through prioritization and problems so that they understand that it's just not like you being off of a whim being like, no, I can't do that, or I'm not willing to do these things. People know that you're willing to do it. um, I think the other thing is it does come a bit. I found that like when I had more imposter syndrome, I tended to say yes to more things, or I had this motivation that I wanted to get promoted and that was my main goal. And I've come across many people emergent in their careers or mid-career who they're like, I want to get promoted. I'm like, okay, but that's like, sure, we all have professional goals. And so why are you doing this thing? Oh, I want to get promoted. That's why I'm doing this thing. I was like, no, wait a minute. Like reframe that, because I think if you're doing really excellent work, people are going to notice that and you're going to get promoted. Right. So it's not that you're doing this thing because to get promoted. It's like, how do you reframe that and say, I want to do excellent work. So here are the things I'm going to focus on. So I do them really, really well. And then because I've created that level of trust, I created that level of output, that level of metrics, impact, that level of impact. Now I'm seen as this person who is, oh wow, this person can really do a lot of things really excellently. They should be promoted. And so I think it's to me, it's been about that. I got better at saying, okay, what are the things I can do really, really well? How do I ensure that I have enough visibility on those things that people understand that I'm doing these things? Because I think oftentimes we can do things in vacuums. And so we don't really speak out the things that we're doing. And that's really critical. Um, because doing more doesn't necessarily equate to doing everything good or everything really well. And so it's I think I reframed that a bit. Not so focused on like I must get promoted, and more so focused on the output and the quality of that output and the outcomes.
What are some of the bigger challenges you faced in your career and how did you overcome these challenges?
I think that one of the challenges that I've faced is I'm somebody who processes information probably extremely quickly. And so like when I'm getting information, I'm automatically, I mean, I have ADHD, and so therefore like it's just something that's part of my life. So I process information super quickly. I can kind of make connections really, really rapidly and get from like point A to point Z pretty quick. And so especially early in my career, I had a really hard time bringing people along. And so I'm like, okay, it's a lot easier for me to skip out on like these like parts 2, 3, and 4 so I can get to part 5 really fast. Um, and I think early on, those things definitely create some level of just like context blindness, right? So you have people who are like, wait, what's happening? Why is this happening? Or like, what are we doing over here? Um, so I think that was a challenge. Again, I really had to learn some skills around just like more effective communication. What were the materials I need to do? I started making this like personal user manual early in my career too, that allowed for people to understand like, hey, here's how I like to receive feedback. Hey, here's how I think. And those sort of things I think are always super helpful when kind of engaging with people in cross-functional teams and cross-functional ways. So that was one thing I think. I mean, other challenges, you have situations where you're put into places of conflict, you have to like increase revenue at the expense of XYZ. And so there were moments like that I think I had when we were at Hinge where, we really needed to increase revenue. So we had to get our things were happening at Tinder, revenues were declining there and user base was declining there. And Hinge was kind of in this position where we had positive momentum going in both kind of the monetary and user base front. And so rather than doing a slower rollout of like the initial plan that we wanted in terms of like expanding into new markets, expanding our kind of our subscription offerings, we had that accelerated on us really, really rapidly. And so I had to like make these decisions to like pull people off of this like localization project into monetization project pretty rapidly without a lot of context. And I think that's probably one of the harder things I've had to manage in my career, just because it had a lot of downstream impact on what people were working on, without feeling a level of agency and understanding because things are happening so rapidly. Um, and I think, in hindsight and upon reflection, like, could you have done it too much differently? Probably not. Because just like, again, everybody's under some level of pressure, and so we were under the pressure from the match group. And so that is what it is. And so, we are getting information almost as quickly as we're disseminating the information. But oftentimes I think people look to their leaders as these people who have all of the information. I think, what I try to do now and in retrospect, what I do moving forward is just say, hey, I don't know. I know as much as information as you're getting. So that level of transparency, also just say, I don't know. And I don't actually know what this means, or I don't know what the outcome might be. But hey, we're here to like solve this together. And like, no one's going to be like held accountable for these things, right? As a sole singular person. If anything, hold me accountable, right? So I think those are the things that I've in my career have learned to do much more effectively as, a person who oftentimes you don't want to give information in pieces, that sometimes you just have to do that. Um, or at least give that context.
Completely agree on that point of I don't know. And we have to figure this out. There's absolutely nothing at all wrong with that. You touched on something earlier, which kind of hits me in a way, the ADHD piece. I have ADHD. And so for me, one of the interesting pieces I think is I feel like growing up and going through school, I had to learn how to manage it and deal with it. And I think I got pretty good at getting through school. Then I started working and I didn't realize that I would have to learn how to kind of remanage it once I actually started to work. And I've talked about this kind of thing before, but I think for me, I think in a lot of ways, having ADHD, while it does make some things harder, I also think there's, in a lot of ways, it's a superpower.
Totally.
I think it makes you really think about things in a different way and dig into problems a little deeper than some people might.
I mean, I think this always, and again, I'll draw some like parallels into the world of like products, into the world of tech in general. But I think ADHD is interesting. Not to turn this into a whole ADHD topic, but I do think that because you are so stimulated, you're able to find like interesting connections in a lot of different topics and like the world at large around you, and people and kind of connections. And I think to your point, like that has made me in some way that's a huge superpower, because I'm able to get to places that people aren't really, really rapidly. And I time and time again, when I talk to folks who I've worked with, who I've managed, who I've worked for, they're like, how do you do this so quickly? And I cannot tell them because I have absolutely no idea. I'm just like, I don't know, this just comes to me naturally.
Yeah.
But I do find that it has caused strains in certain aspects of the job that are also critical in the product world. Like there's strategy, there's execution, there is like understanding data and insights really well. There's communication, there's cross-functional management and alignment. But sometimes, again, especially when I say yes too much, quote unquote, that's where you start to have a lot too many, streams work happening at one time. And like then the organizational piece like kind of starts to collapse. And then the procrastination piece starts to like really rise up because of the anxiety is increasing over time. And again, going back to like my mentor who's like, what got you here won't get you there. And like as you start to shift roles, you really need to start to shift the things that you prioritize and focus on and say yes to, and what actually you're measured against. And there those pivotal moments of when you're an IC PM contributor, you are really measured on like your ability to execute, your ability to communicate, your ability to drive results and impact. Great. And I was really, really good at that. And then when you're a manager or a leader, it's not so much just about that. It's like, how do you bring your entire team together? How do you keep them really well informed? And like when you are making a bunch of decisions really rapidly, and when you're procrastinating or when you're, doing all these different things and not super organized, that makes it really hard to keep your entire team informed and brought along. And I had to make that really big shift in what's the outcome that is driving you, what's the outcome that you're being measured for or against. And again, I think that's sometimes a little bit harder for people who have, ADHD, who think differently, who have some type of neurodivergency, to make those hard pivots. Sometimes a little bit like, oh, actually not, I'm on this pathway now. Let's like, you have to make a stepwise change. It's not as like simple as just like changing a small habit. It's a huge stepwise change that you have to like really train yourself to
Yeah,
do.
absolutely true. And I'm sure there's a lot more we could go onto on that path to keep this going forward. And I do have more questions I want to ask you. So can you share an instance where a setback or failure turned into a hidden opportunity?
But one of the most interesting things I kind of worked on was at Spotify, and we were working on, as I mentioned, a shared listening model. And so really that's basically shared taste profiles. So the idea was I was on the team working on Family Plan and Duo, and we were about to launch the new Duo plan at Spotify. So we were basically like on the revenue team looking across all of our plan types. How do you basically get more revenue? How do we reduce plan sharing from the old family plan, things of that nature. And we wanted to build a bunch of features that also supported the new plan types. And one of those features that had been ideated on was a family mix or a duo mix, basically a mix where you could take all people from your plan type and create a shared listening experience. Like maybe we're in a household and we're all cooking dinner. So we spent a lot of time building out this shared listening model. It took tons of iterations to build. If you can imagine, like how do you find an amalgamated taste for like six people who might have like one might like hard rock, one might classical music, right? That's a pretty far gap from the center.
Yeah.
Um, but like him doing this, it was a really fun project. We branded it. We like to do like the premium revenue team on this. It was really, really fun. We had like basically like such low usage because no one was using the product in the way that it was intended. Like how many people are actually on a plan wanting to cook dinner with each other, wanting to hear their family mix, like maybe friends want that. And like that's a cool use case, but like that was the exact thing that we were trying to build against, right? Is like we don't want six friends living in six different locations sharing a family plan for $14.99. That's like $2 a pop. That's like way cheaper. So that didn't end up working, and we spent months and months and months building this. And that was a moment of just kind of like, wow, this thing's not really working. People aren't really using it. We spent a lot of time and a lot of investment in this. But the positive thing that came out of that is like we still had a lot of really, really amazing underlying tech. I mean, there was a use case there. People who were using are people not the intended customers. So we ended up that ended up becoming the basis of Blend, which is where you can basically take like if you and I wanted to create a playlist together, we can just like jam and blend. Like you can create a jam, we can create a blend, and all of a sudden now we have like Ryan and I and like my friends at a party all have their music tastes amalgamated, and we have a new playlist for this party, which is really great. Or if I want to join a jam with I'm gonna hey, let me join that jam, we can join that jam. And so that particular concept and UI and underlying algorithm powered these other two amazing experiences that are now used by a variety, much larger audiences. So that was really cool. But I do think, in retrospect, like that's why I think it's so critical on like the user insights front and like really getting early signals to do that more. So you don't spend months and months and months building something that ultimately is not for naught.
What specific skills or mindsets have been crucial navigating your career twists and turns?
One of resiliency. I think that it's really important to have resilience, especially in the world of product where things might go wrong, where you might, ship something that doesn't work, where you might encounter a roadblock and things take 4 more weeks to get shipped out, or, your company goes through a downturn. I think resiliency is really, really important. I think having a growth mindset is something that I think has really been critical in my career thus far. As always wanting to be learning. Like even at my stage, I always want to be learning something new. So even with Lex, like my day-to-day is not just products. Like sometimes I'm answering customer service emails. Sometimes I'm doing ad sales. And it's not that nothing is above my pay grade. Nothing is above my skill set. Because you know what? I actually have no idea how to do ad sales. I'm learning how to do ad sales. I had no idea how to do SEO. Now I'm learning how to do SEO. And I think it's if you have a growth mindset, you'll always have an opportunity ahead because you're willing to learn something new. And I think for us in our industry, things are changing more rapidly than ever. New companies are popping up every single day with the enablement of AI and various like agent capabilities. Our jobs are changing on the design front, on the UX research front, on the product front. And I think it's just so critical to always be learning new tools, new technologies, new domains so that you have some level of awareness because things are going to look very different in 5 years, than they did for me 5 years ago.
Yeah, the growth mindset piece is just so important. I really like that. With hindsight, what would you do differently in your career?
Oh man. I think I would have slowed down a little bit. I was always in like such a hurry. And I think that hurriedness like has caused me to like have some strained relationships that I had to then work to repair, like getting out of that mindset of like, okay, I'm such in a hurry. It's a hurry to go where? It's like kind of what I think about it now. It's like, when you're young in your career, like you're hurried to get a promotion because you want people to like give you validation that like your skills are good and you're like doing a good job. And I think we've been primed societally from this like extrinsic feedback, whether it was like gold stars or the A+ that we got on our report cards, or whether it was like an Instagram like or a Facebook, thumbs up or a friend request or whatever the case may be. And so like in all aspects of our life, especially as like millennials, I think that we've been primed for this extrinsic, reward and feedback loops. And when you get into the workforce, it's like they don't have that really. You might have like biannual like review cycles and that's it. So like your reward really is like getting that praise and that feedback. And I always say like, haha, I have this praise kink that like I can't like, satisfy ever. But I think it's really important just to slow down and to give yourself some grace when things aren't necessarily going at the speed or the pace or the direction that you want. Like I've experienced hiccups, I've like lost jobs. I've like, had to like rebuild and things of that nature. And I think that it's really critical to have enough self-assuredness in yourself. Yeah, have enough assuredness in yourself that, everything's going to be okay. And like you can still kind of overcome an obstacle, overcome a challenge. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing I would do a little bit differently. Just like, the pace at which I needed to get from point A to point B, slow that down just a lick and you're still doing pretty good.
I mean, what you just said is actually great advice for anyone listening in terms of thinking about slowing down or knowing that whatever it is that you're going through are things that you can overcome. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of product looks like?
We are in this like crossroads and I follow a lot of like the big products like leaders and thinkers and authors, on LinkedIn and whatnot. And I think a lot of them are kind of saying similar things, but product managers in this job has always been one where you are very like T-shaped, you're very, very broad. You know a little bit a lot. And you're really excellent at kind of like taking a bunch of information and like packaging it up and then communicating cross-functionally, learning a lot of skill sets, tinkering, tailoring. I think that's a really foundational, valuable skill to have, especially now with AI tools that allow for you to, more agentic tools that allow for you to like really amalgamate your skill sets. I think if you're able to have really good ideas, now the ideas people we're back, like now execution is a dime a dozen. Like, if now we can take development time from 10 weeks to 2 weeks, that's incredible but you need a good idea. And why is that thing going to be scalable? Why is that thing going to be useful? What information do I need to seek out in order to validate different assumptions? And I think that's what product managers do really, really well. The best product managers are not project managers. We have tools and we have software to help us with that. The best product managers are people who are able to think really, really big and then go and execute on those ideas. And now time from idea to execution, if you can do that really well, is much quicker. You can get validation much faster than we could ever before. So I think our job will change a lot like that. It's the best PMs will be people who really are aware of trends in the market, who really have a good pulse on what's happening in the market, what's happening with with humans. Again, products are used by humans who really can tap into that like human understanding, that human empathy, really understand the variety of places that people are engaging with products and services, not just their particular product or service, and use all that information to kind of feed this into both their teams and into these different AI systems and agentic systems that allow for them to, superpower or supercharge their own ability to kind of execute and deliver.
What are the most important takeaways from your career that you would like to share with others?
I cannot like underscore the power of a like personal board, or mentors. And so I have both. I have people who are mentors who are much more senior than I, who give me advice, like give me sageful advice, But more importantly than mentors are my peers, who are people that I can feel as vulnerable with, being like, because, maybe with a mentor or your boss or an advisor, you're like, I don't want to say like I failed here. Maybe that's like a thing. But with my friends who are not, and these are peers who I've made who are now considered my friends, who I'm like, I built these relationships up with. What I remember when I was actually doing my big deck for my Netflix interview, I was like, I really spent a whole week working on that. I was like, I really was eager to get this job. And I'd pitch it to them and I would get their feedback. And I spent time like going to each of them, like in groups and one-on-ones. And so this personal board of, your personal board of advisors, I think is really, really critical. And investing in those relationships so they're bi-directional. I think that's when the best learning happens. Like, even though I, you know, have done XYZ job, like I don't care. I have friends who aren't doing XYZ job who I'm like, your insights are just as valuable as anybody else's. And I think having those people who know you, who have seen you, who can give you feedback and advice, both on a professional level as well as a personal level, are really invaluable. And I really always encourage everybody to have at least 3 or 4 people who are those people who they can kind of go to, who are in a similar industry, because you have that level of understanding, who you can tap into for these things like once in a while. And I think that's been a really saving grace for me, especially in moments where I was struggling to, deal with like hard feedback, or I was struggling on how to give hard feedback. Those are always like super, I think it's really critical. We always talk about mentors, but we need to talk about our kind of our peer set.
So I really like that. And I had actually first heard this concept of the personal board actually doing these interviews. And I think it's just amazing. And it's made me kind of even reframe how I think, about mentorship. And, the other piece of it is I think it's also important, somebody had talked about this, to also think about your personal board as being people who are even outside of the discipline you sit in, just to bring a completely different perspective, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think that's like, for me, it is both people who like understand. I think outside of industry or outside of discipline, like you see, you'll kind of understand the things that you're going through, and are able to give you kind of sound advice on that, or just be sounding boards. So I think that's really critical and a good add-on.
I've even been trying to put that to practice. I have a talk coming up later this year. I actually do it a few times, but I've actually been running through some of the content with, and I've never done this before, but actually going through and peer reviewing that content with different people who are kind of in different segments of the industry. And the feedback that I'm getting is amazing. It's just making such a big difference in terms of helping me frame my thought on things. So the next question is going to have 2 parts. What advice would you give to someone earlier in their career who are still trying to figure things out? And likewise, what advice would you give to a more seasoned leader?
I think someone early in their career, I think it's really important to, again, learn, find those people online who have done it before. I even like, Lenny's podcast, or Elena Verna, or Casey Winters, people who are, Brian Balfour, the people who are just kind of these like product, sages, influencers. I read their stuff or read their content. I think it's really, really powerful. It's a good kind of like just like baseline to kind of understand how the industry has changed, the trends that do work, that don't work. I think people who are, really early in their career, it's like, don't try to do too much all at once. Like again, I think this is kind of what goes back to what I've echoed, what I've been saying, which is when you're early in your career, like I know people always like have this like desire, like hustle and like move super, super rapidly. And like, that's fine. I'm not almost also saying that don't do that. But I'm saying you need to like be patient sometimes, right? And learn like the baseline skill sets. I have some people so often their entire goal again is to get promoted and they're like missing the foundational aspects of what's going to make them a really good product leader, really good manager in the future. And I think being able to feel super comfortable, like taking a product from a feature to an enhancement of that feature. Great. Get really comfortable with those cycles. Get really comfortable in going 0 to 1 with something. Like learn those skill sets and don't try to like race past them because they're not strategy. I always hear people like, I want to do strategy. Okay, well, the best strategies are ones that are executed effectively. So if you've never done the execution piece of it and you've never wanted to put in the time to do that, you are not going to do product strategy very effectively when you get to that place. And then it's going to be really, really hard for you to go back and learn the execution pieces of things. So I think really invest in cross-functional relationships, really lean in and really learn the basics of design thinking, UX, really to understand the foundations of user experience and user research, really understand the foundations of backend systems and data systems and how those things, connect to your front end system. Like those things are really critical to have those building blocks so that when you start to get promoted and you start to elevate, you are also just a better collaborator because you're able to have those conversations more fluently. So I think that's really critical. I think for mid-stage people who are like kind of at their mid-stage career, I see so many people get complacent and they're like, oh no, I'm gonna get promoted next year. And so now I'm still back in this promotion like landscape, and I know, but I think that it's really critical. Like if you're not growing in a company, it is your sign. If people aren't investing in your growth, it is a sign that you need to start looking elsewhere. Or you need to start to like sound an alarm to people in your company to start to like really help advocate for you because you're your only advocate at the end of the day.
That is so true.
If you are not keeping a log, or I see this all the time, people like are doing excellent work all quarter long, all year long, and then come to review time, they're scrambling to figure out what did I do? And then what's going to happen there? Roll recency bias. So everything that you just did is going to be the things that you're going to put down, and everything your manager just saw is going to be the thing that they remember. And so if you're not keeping this log, you're not keeping this narrative, this story about all the things that you've been doing, from the tests that you've shipped, from the insights that you've gleaned, from the learnings that you are planning, like you're then going to be struggling constantly to like come up with your review. And people don't spend any time on their reviews usually. And it's like, that's one of the most important things. I know this from being a leader and having to think about promotions and compensation. You're doing that really, really rapidly. So if the only thing I know is what you wrote down, and I don't know actually all the other context of what you have, how am I going to advocate to my superiors, to my boss, that you deserve a promotion or a compensation increase over everybody else who wants the same exact thing? And so I think especially for mid-career people, you can get kind of stuck in this loop of like feeling like it's like, I don't know, bitter, or like, oh, I didn't get this promotion this time. Like, what am I going to do next time? Have agency take control over that yourself. So that's my advice as well. So keeping that kind of in the same way that you would keep a log of your tests that you ran and you give an output, keep that for yourself. So at the end of this review period, you have something to pull from.
And anything for the more senior leader?
The more senior leader, I mean, I think honestly, like look out for your teams. I think that's obviously it's like that seems like obviously it's pretty self-explanatory, but I have seen people who like when they're getting pressure, like, and I've been responsible for this too, is you kind of get in a flurry a little bit. I think as much as you can be transparent with your teams and give as much context as possible, even in times where there is like not full information. I think that's always has proven to me at the very least to be something that I've found to be very useful in my own career.
And wrapping up here, what is your favorite quote?
Well, I've said it a couple times now. What got you here won't get you there. There's a book about it, and I think that that is, for me, something I always think about because that's applicable to people regardless of where they are. And I think it's always a good measure to be reflective on how far you've come and then pause and reflect and envision where you want to go and what things might need to change as you're going through both stages of those growth cycles.
Content recommendations?
Well, I mentioned kind of like Lenny's podcast. It's obviously a big one now these days. Akash Gupta, I like his newsletter as well. I also love the book Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. So it's a fiction book. So it's not necessarily a product book, but that one is a good like little inspiration book for me.
Awesome. And lastly, where can people find you?
Follow me on LinkedIn, just Michelle Parsons or, MICHC Parsons. And then I'm also on Instagram at Shelly Cruzita.
Amazing. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for taking time to do this today. There's so much good insight and wisdom from you, so I really appreciate that. And looking forward to getting this episode released.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content today, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.